what you must recognize is the fundamental thing, and that fundamental thing is that we are dominated, and those who dominate us will constantly look for the means of justifying their domination. And each new initiative essentially is a new thrust which provides a new logic for justifying domination and a new methodology for executing it. But the constant there is still domination. The constant there is still social control. In other words, the European never intends to give up social control of African people. And the only thing that will be changed will be perhaps the justificatory excuses and the methodologies of control, but little else. You must keep one fundamental thing in mind, as Howard Zinn warned, that the establishment, though it may reward us, in order to maintain its control, if necessary, it will kill us. The essential idea that motivates white supremacy is that of maintaining control and dominance. And this establishment that maintains control and dominance will at one time reward you, Negro bourgeoisie, and when necessary to maintain its control, will also kill you. And I'm saying that because there's some of us who think because we are receiving certain rewards from this system that these rewards will continue forever. But you have to recognize rewards are a mean of control as much as punishment. We talk about it in psychology as what? Positive reinforcement. Yeah. Bribing. Yeah. So you give positive reinforcement, good salaries and what have you, good house and so forth, and all of a sudden those people who were gate rebels in the 1960s become neoconservatives in the 1980s and say, you know, they got the good life, they bought the idea, they think that this is going to go on forever. Have not studied the manipulation through rewards. And they went to college to study psychology. You know, and I've told you before how we are miseducated when we study psychology. We'll go right in there and study Skinnerian psychology and conditioning. And what have I told you before? We will not put ourselves in the place of the rat in the box. And we will not put ourselves in the place of the Pavlovian dog. We misidentify ourselves with the experimenter. But the actual condition of African people at this point is that of the Pavlovian dog and the Skinnerian rat, with others being at the controls and manipulating rewards and punishments and what we call negative reinforcements as a way of controlling our behavior. And when we talk about behavior in psychology, we not only talk about movement, but mental behavior as well, thinking in certain ways, seeing in certain ways, experiencing the world in certain ways. We include that too under behavior when we talk about behavior. And there are three fundamental ways, you see, of maintaining behavior in a conditioning situation. Rewards, and then what we call positive reinforcement. Then you have negative reinforcement, which isn't the same as punishment. It's a situation where you release a person from a painful situation on the condition that they behave in a particular way. So in a sense, you put them in a painful situation. You say, well, I'll let you out of this if you do this. Or if they're in a painful situation, you say, well, I'll remove this situation if you behave in this way. This is what we call negative reinforcement. You see, a release from a negative situation, which is a form of reward. So I will release you from the ghetto if you say, I am an American and I love it. There is no racism. I don't feel dominated. Individualism is the highest ideology in the world. Okay, we'll give you a little extra pennies and you can live in a nice house. Get yourself a VCR and look at movies. And then those who belong to the underclass, we just can't change them. They're in a painful situation. They look like they even like it there. So for those, we have to administer what? Punishment. You see. But what do all of these have in common? Social control. Control. You see, so those of us who are being rewarded by the American system doesn't mean that we are any more out of the control of Europeans than those of us who are in the prisons. The game is the same. Social control, and until you decide as a people to end the capacity of whites to control your lives, we will always be subservient to them. And if one day we have to recognize that it becomes necessary to annihilate African people in order that the European stays in social control, then they will annihilate us. I don't care what kind of degrees you got and what kind of money you're making. The Jewish educated marched to the chambers with the uneducated. Yeah. You think you're going to hold up your degree when they march you to the chambers? I went to Harvard. Good, you go first. We'll give you that privilege. We'll put you in our most comfortable gas chamber. There's some of us who are caught. But we must deal with these issues, and we must keep our eyes on the reality here that we've got to change the nature of the power relationship between us and Europeans. We've got to be bold enough to challenge the European and to defeat their power. There's no other way around it. In fact, not only must we challenge the Europeans, we must challenge the Asians, and we must challenge the Latin Americans as well. We must challenge any group. We must challenge any group that threatens to constrain our freedom and threatens to exploit us. And that does not include any other group. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that nations and people do not have permanent friends. They only have permanent interest. And the people who are your allies today can be your enemies tomorrow. And you must keep that in mind, because there's some of us who are deceived in this direction as well. I hear a lot of blacks use the word black and Latino constantly. We're related, yes, but there are also differences. And these differences can be exploited at different times. Some of you, if you've looked at 13 last week or so when they were running a series of programs on the Spanish in America, You might have seen one particular program open up that says, we will no longer help the blacks in Los Angeles. We will no longer support the gringos and the Jews. We are now 40% of Los Angeles County, and we intend to control this city. We will no longer be told what slice of the pie that we will get. We will tell how the pie is to be divided. You must come to your realistic sense. Nations and people do not fall in love. They do not marry each other. Because see, we have some foolish people out here who look at their personal relations with white folk. And they have good white friends. And I'm not doubting the sincerity of the friendship. Not at all. Not at all. I do not doubt that blacks and whites can be truly friendly, and we should be friendly as people. And I don't see any problem with having those friends, you know. But do not confuse your personal relations with the relations between groups. Do not always assume that the dynamics that determines your personal relationships are the same dynamics that can be used between groups. That's a serious error that a lot of people make, you see. So they have a lot of personal friends who belong to other ethnic groups, and that's fine. So do I. But you can't confuse those. You know, you get some people who have good friends with Koreans, you know, they speak well while they're spending all their money there. And, you know, they can't understand why we would seek to struggle against these people for the ownership of our economic turf. Because for them, you know, we're friendly. What, you know, but you got to understand some other things. We have Martha Banney here. You remember of Kafir Boy fame? And yeah, I think he's got something called Beyond Black and White or some nonsense, where he's presenting us his relationship with his white wife, which is supposed to, I guess, be some paradigm for the relationship between black folk and white folk. It's not the same thing. Groups, on certain levels, there are parallels. On other levels, those parallels do not function and they do not work. And you got to make a division between those two things. But let me get on with the subject matter here today, talking a little bit about media's relationship to the African family values. And it's interesting, we talked about Dan Quayle, and it's interesting because you see the media, particularly in terms of TV, and some of the other media, of course, both misrepresents reality, but in a way also reflect reality. And I guess the best thing you say is the media often sends ambiguous and sometimes ambivalent images and ambivalent messages, because often the media are the battleground for conflicts between various power blocks and various groups. Often what goes on in the media reflects, even though they may be distortions and denials, and even though the media is essentially the propaganda instrument of the ruling classes, but if we look closely at it, they often reflect the social, political, and economic changes going on in the society. And it's interesting to analyze the media in terms of demographic changes. What groups are increasing in power, decreasing in power? What groups are changing in their composition and nature, and see how this is reflected in the media itself. Just the other day, by the way, I ordered a new magazine that is being published by Dow Jones, the publishers of the Wall Street Journal, called, I believe, Demographics. They recognize, of course, that tremendous population changes are taking place in America. And, of course, to be up on top of these changes and to convert these changes into bucks, they now will publish a magazine for the business class so that they will know where the various populations are, their values, their habits, and all these other things, so that the business persons can market their products and appeals to the various populations in the country. Whites are very much interested in multiculturalism, not for the same reasons we are, of course. They recognize that America is, of course, a nation of various groups. They now will use that information to, again, further their own economic and political interests, as well as I said earlier, to maintain social, economic, and political control. Consequently, you will see the face, as you've already seen, of TV and the media changing as it seeks to grapple with the demographic changes that occur in America. To a good extent, the struggle between Murphy Brown and the traditionalists represents a change in the demographics of the American family situation. Not only the black family situation, but in the American family situation as a whole. Again, you have another one of these ridiculous kind of arguments where terms are not defined. And of course, one of the major terms that's not defined is that of family. You know, what is a family? Once again, when you look at this, you'll recognize that that term is not monolithic either, that there are various types of families, and there have been various types of families for a long time. There have been different kinds of. What do we mean, the family? The traditional family. What kind of family is that? If you are going to talk about the traditional family in America, by that I assume you mean married with children. Then at this point, you're only talking about 25% of the American households. This is not even a majority family structure in this country right now. 25% of the American family households consist of married couples with children. So we're talking about something that's dwindling fast, rapidly. In fact, in 1970, married couples with a child or children under 18 as a percentage of all households was 40%. 1980 it was down to 30, and 1991 it's down to 25%. So what kind of family are we talking about here? 29% of American households are married couples without children. 25% of American households are people living alone. The fastest growing segment of the American household population. What are we talking about here? The traditional family. Where is it? 5% of the households includes people, unrelated people living together. 6% other families without children, and 8% other families with children. We're talking about something that really is ceasing to exist. And yet, what we're talking about then, the use of a fantasy by the ruling class, you see, to manipulate reality and to manipulate people's emotions and attitudes. And we're going to find that to a great extent. Why do we see the Bill Cosbys on TV? And of course, again, the Murphy Browns. The Murphy Browns, of course, represents an increasing segment of the white population. The single-headed white family, which has, of course, been with us since the beginning, too, by the way. This is not a new family. Let me read you a little segment from a book that I'm going to quote from a bit later on here. Just to sort of catch you up a little with history. Thank you. Mm-hmm. This is from an article in the September-October 1992 New Age magazine, which treated the book, and I'd recommend the book for you, The Way We Never Were. American Families and the Nostalgia Trap. In other words, we're celebrating a family that frankly never really existed in America anyway. You see, published by Basic Books, 1992, by social historian Stephanie Kuntz, C-O-O-N-T-Z. The New Age magazine gives a very long treatment of this book, and I recommend it as a book because it'll help break a lot of the myths we have about these so-called families and the traditional families. The 1960s generation did not invent premarital out-of-wedlock sex. Indeed, the straight-laced sexual morality of 19th century Anglo-American societies, hardly revived in the 50s, seems to have been a historical and cultural aberration. In other words, some people also look at the traditional family as the kind of family we had in the 50s. The 50s, to a degree, revived the 19th century American family. Americans' founding fathers were not always married. In Concord, Massachusetts, a bastion of Puritan tradition, 1/3 of all children born during the 20 years prior to the American Revolution were conceived out of wedlock. During the 1780s and 1790s, 1/3 of the brides in rural New England were pregnant at marriage. Okay, where is this family? A study of illegitimacy in North Carolina found that out-of-wedlock birth rates of white women were approximately the same in 1850 as in 1970, though the pattern was more indicative of class exploitation than it is today. The fathers tended to be well-off heads of intact families, while the mothers lived in poor female-headed households. These same jokers that want to come to you and talk, pretend that they're morally superior, and a major part of impregnating the women and creating the very families that they're talking about. In 19th century America, the age of consent for girls in many states was as low as 9 or 10. You talk about child abuse used to be legal. Oh, yes. Yeah. When she was 9 or 10, she was at the age of consent. So they could be taken at that age. What one author calls the myth of an abstinent past. We got these people, just tell them to be abstinent. Even your generation wasn't abstinent to that degree you think, or the prior ones. And it goes on, but we just want to indicate to a degree that many of the issues that are here today have been around some time, but the media and others present these false images and they create terrific problems. This group, headed by single white women, of course, moving into positions of power and influence, and of course, what I find very interesting, white women are not afraid, and the white feminists are not afraid to talk about power. We as African Americans seem to have a problem with talking about power. But these women will talk about empowerment just as they talk about anything else. And they're clear that they want real power in this society. I was reading a piece here the other day where you have now lending institutions that are designed to lend money to women going into business exclusively, not including men and other minorities. I'm saying that because, you see, one of the things that black folk are, we are over-inclusive. We want to bring everybody in on the party. And we've been made guilty when we don't bring everybody in. And here's a group that's founded, it's lending institutions and so forth, and their stated purpose is to lend to women, specifically to white females, exclusively, and support their economic growth and development. This group plans to be heard, and it's making itself heard and represents itself through shows like Murphy Brown. And now the American establishment is trying to come to terms with this group. And so in part what you see Quayle engaged in is a struggle even within the European American group. Of course, we know there's another program under there as well. though, about how shall the American family be represented, and can we now make room for the demographic changes in the white family itself, and how should that family be evaluated. You'll note one thing, you see, I tell people often, the changes in the black community are presage, or to a degree predict changes that will occur in the white community. What you see happening in the black community today will be happening to the white community tomorrow. The interesting thing about it is, though, since it happens to us first, we get all of the pejorative terms. You see, the language does not change, and we get all of the negative evaluations. But you note when the whites move into it to a measurable degree, all of a sudden it changes. And you begin to change the negative descriptions that blacks receive now to more positive and neutral descriptions. And so there's a struggle now going on, you see. How should we name these families? Can we accept them because our own daughters are creating these families and these children? How should we deal with them? And it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. You see, when you look at America, you got to look at it too as being ruled in part by a white male establishment, elite establishment, and of course by a ruling class. And you have class struggles going on within that community, and of course the class struggles going on across racial groups as well. This class niggerized the African. It prepared us to be consumers and not producers, and that's our major role today. And that is our intended role forever as far as the European is concerned, is to consume. But unfortunately for them, they're so greedy until after they saturated the black consumer market, they had now to niggerize their own children and their own people. And now America is rapidly turning into a nation of consumers. And the production is being done now outside of the country. And we're beginning to suffer economically and socially and politically as production itself is beginning to move out of white American hands, and the whole population is made into one big mouth to consume. And attitudes and other things that go with this kind of consumer orientation is beginning to occur in the white population. And now that population is letting the Asians do its thinking and Asians do its production and other kind of things, you see. So this kind of situation is going on. The Bill Cosby situation also, of course, represents demographic changes within the black community as well. The rise of the so-called black middle class, of a class of black people. A class now that's being represented by the likes of Henry Louis Gates of Harvard University, Cornell West, and some of the other rascals that are in the major colleges and universities across this country. Talking about media. Have you noticed the amount of media attention this gentleman is getting? How many people saw that article, that whole page in the New York Times? Yes, the graphics were interesting, with the African graphics running down the border of the page. Literally a whole page being given to this man, with the silhouette of the Star of David right in the center. Just the graphics alone indicate something there, ladies. You have to study all of these things. And the fact that the New York Times, which if you were to to buy that as advertising space, I don't know, what is it now, about $15,000? Literally gave this page to Henry Louis Gates to talk about black anti-Semitism. But again, Gates is being presented across all the papers, the magazines, and so forth. And Gates reminds you of one of those Negroes, and he says it very clearly, that says, I'm not like the rest of them. You know, those who used to be flattered when white folk would say, if they were like you, we wouldn't mind. It's those others over there, So you think if you work hard enough to show them you're not like the rest of them over there, then you'll be accepted. And so you got a crowd now in this country that is trying to convince us very much that they're not like the rest of them. And Gates is saying, look, there is a black middle class culture, and you should pay attention to that culture. And this culture is very different from the black inner city culture. Why are you only presenting the Spike Lee movies that project, the inner city? And why are you not projecting the black middle class and showing that there's a culture that is distinct from the others, you see? So how do we represent the black middle class on TV? And how do we represent the fact then that there's a class division going on in America? And so what we have now in the inner cities are not poor black folk, but we call them the underclass. We don't even give them what? An ethnic designation, you see. They're just what? The underclass. So they're not related to their better off cousins in the suburbs. And so now we are getting this bourgeois class represented in the American press. And of course this bourgeois class often sporting neoconservative values and supporting the racial ethnic status quo, serving to maintain division within the black community. If you'd seen yesterday's Times, they're talking about income gap thins middle class blacks, two economic trends wedging rich from poor in the United States. The rise of the two-income family and the loss of blue-collar jobs have widened the gap between the haves and have-nots in the black population. The percentage of high-income black families more than doubled from 1967 to 1990. At the same time, the proportion of black families at the lowest income levels grew by 50%. In 1990, more than one black family in 9 earned less than 50%, $5,000 a year. In the graph here, they show that in 1967, 8% of black families earned less than $5,000, with 7% black families earning more than $50,000. 1990, 12% black families earning less than $5,000. That's an interesting figure. 5,000, what is 5,000? What is 10,000 for a family? What is 15,000? What is 20,000 for a family? 5,000 certainly is a very low figure here. So when you add in the other income levels, you have a very broad segment of what we call basically poor people, or what you call the working poor. So by 1990, 15% of black families were earning more than $50,000. So from 1967, you had a doubling of black families earning more than $50,000. That the percentage, the widening gap has meant a marked decrease in the proportion of black families in the middle income ranges, which means those that are making money in between the 5 and the 50 are thinning out, and you're getting a typical third world kind of trend here of where you're either pretty rich or you're just dirt poor, and where the middle income is being knocked out. This is just not a change in income. This will bring about changes in attitudes, changes in relationships, and these changes that will be represented in the media. These families then, such as the Huxtables on TV, carry with them subtle ideological implications. Not only do we have then well-to-do blacks, which means that we are not really oppressing black people, but these blacks are where they are because of determination and persistence. And those who are poor then are lacking in basic characteristics. So the projection of the black middle-class family on TV can be used very much to distort the reality of oppression and to distort the reality of the fact that we are a dominated people. I've warned you before that under imperialism, at some point, the imperialists elevate quite a percentage of their subordinate population, because generally the imperialist population is much smaller than the peoples it rules over. And as it becomes more efficient, it recruits from the people it rules over certain of those people to help it in its ruling relationship. We call that neocolonialism. In America, we call that integration or affirmative action. The same thing, though. People still under the domination of whites. I don't care how much money you make. Still under control of whites. However, the movement of these people up means that they can join their masters in manipulating the behavior of the rest of us. They can be used as symbols by their masters that the society is fair, that it provides an even playing field for those in it, and that those then who do not make it merely are suffering from some kind of deficiency in their personality. And therefore, you will see TV then projecting both of these images in a way sometimes. The middle class image as well as the lower class image. I want to tell you something while we're on this issue, by the way. When we talk about domination, I mentioned this the other evening, we have to recognize that domination benefits, of course, those who dominate. And this means that those who dominate have an investment in maintaining, of course, their domination. After the Gil Noble program last Sunday, I got a call from a person who wanted me to invest in some project that he wanted to develop, where he wanted to present a positive image of black youth. And he wanted this youth in the movement to perform various miracles and to demonstrate to the other people that, you know, our youth are not all bad and, you know, the whole bit. And that's commendable. But of course, he had terrific problems getting that kind of project funded. And I think he was told at one point that we want youth who project criminality. You see. You have to come to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the image of the black adolescent as criminal, it's worth billions of dollars to white folk. The image is worth money. You understand? When you project the image of the black adolescent as a criminal, you will fill theaters. And most of them will be filled by black folk and white folk. In other words, what are the whites saying? We have an investment in these images. These images are worth what? Money to us. Therefore, we cannot let these images go, because these images people pay to see. They do not pay to see black saints and good folk. There's no money in it. So whether you are good or bad or indifferent is not our problem. we are in business, and the image of you as bad is the one that makes us the most money. You have to recognize then that the media is about image. So it's not just a mere matter of racism, it's also a matter of racial economics. And that's one of the reasons why, you see, until you can get the projection of good black images on TV to make money, pretty much you're going to get the criminal image. Sometimes the black middle class image can be used and is used to condemn the rest of the black population and represent Eurocentric ideology of individualism. I'm going to run rapidly because my time is running out here, but I want to cover a couple of other things here. We have to recognize then that demographic changes will be represented in TV, and you watch, you can see the political struggles that are going on, social and economic struggles that are going on, by analyzing not only the show, but when do certain type of shows come up on TV. You also should analyze, and I want you not only to analyze the white media, you should analyze the black media, which is also very much a part of the problem here. Yes, it has not yet arrived to the fact that it must educate the black population. There's still very little education going on. And I'm not condemning every newspaper in this, but I'm speaking in generalities here. I opened Essence magazine the other day, and the very first page I opened to was a fold out of 9 pages. You know, one of these unfolding, 9 pages, cosmetics, full color. If you put that, if you know how much those ads would be worth in Ebony magazine? Each one of those pages, a full color page, and basically the first page in the magazine would probably cost you between $40,000 to $50,000 a piece. Understand? I don't know what the Essence rate is, but even if we said if we said it was $20,000 a piece, what do you got here? $180,000. And you call this a black magazine? You got to be out of your mind. Essence is the greatest white triumph in the black community ever seen. Because as you leaf through every page, there's an ad for what? Cosmetics. One page after another. Black business person can hardly even get in these places. Ebony is the same way. Emerge is another one. Even though they pretend to be dealing with the issues. You know, they're a little better at the game. They will talk at the issues in the black community. Of course, Ebony just pretends they don't even exist. It just floats along in the mist, you know. Emerge will write about the issues, but it will not permit people who are really involved with the issues to write the articles. So it'll write about Jeffries or about Afrocentrism, you see. But it won't let those proponents of Afrocentrism represent their own views in the magazine in depth. And if it presents a somewhat controversial article, it will be carefully balanced, or you will see the first page with the editorial kind of negating the rest of the page. I saw a letter here the other day where Brother Terrence Jackson, who talked about putting it together and the possibility that AIDS was a type of germ warfare. The advertising agency for Emerge turned the ad down and sent him his money back. You talk about freedom of speech. You got to be kidding. Says we have a diverse audience. What do they mean? White folk read us, and we got white advertisers, and we can't dare shake them. We have yet to get a real black, African-centered, national magazine in the fullest sense of the word. And we have to recognize that and deal with that. When other people are sponsoring these magazines and papers and so forth, then these people are going to be responsive to those who sponsor them. We have to look at that. We got many in our media trying to make black people believe that every problem that confronts us is the result of the fact that we don't vote. And every time we discuss a problem, well, if you would vote, then what? I asked them right away, name major victories that black people achieved through voting. Did we vote to get the vote? When you look at many of the so-called milestones achieved by our people in America, they were not gotten through voting. Why are we now being sold in on the idea that voting is the only route to black power in America, when our own history shows that this is not the case? Is it the fact that a good deal of our media is dominated by people who have achieved their social status through the electoral process and have achieved their wealth and power due to their attachment to the Democratic Party? And therefore, they want to sell the black population on the idea that their route to power and prestige is also the black community's route to liberation? To get the black community to falsely identify with their election as representing an advancement for the black community as a whole? So consequently, those who control that media then project to black people that the only solution to dealing with our problems is voting them into office and then having some kind of vicarious orgasm once they get in, even though we are still unemployed and homeless once they get there. You've got to deal with the realities here. I'm trying to get some people now to do a full analysis of the media, black and white, in America, because I offer the idea that we have not had a good critique of the black media since E. Franklin Frazier's Black Bourgeoisie. And we need to do it. Let me move. This family values, and this whole issue of family values, you have to recognize is a phony issue. First of all, you got to recognize that families are not isolated. Families are an integral part of a society, and families reflect the nature of a society, the political, economic nature of a society, and values that families represent are values that have been developed over time in terms of the nature and the dynamics of the culture in which those families reside and exist. These values are not developed merely only within the families themselves, but are really values that grow out of the whole dynamics that characterizes the culture in which these families exist. And as economic and political changes occur, so will the nature and character of families, so will family values change as well. When America was a predominantly rural country, you will see a different type of family composition. As it became urbanized, you will see another type of family composition. You must keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that the social and political forces of a nation creates family structures and values, you see. And it reinforces some while not reinforcing others. And if you want to get a good look at what family values are and why they're changing and how they have changed, you must analyze the context in which families reside, you see. Now you've got a famous trick here that we all put in often. And this is the trick. I pointed it out here earlier when I stated the other evening that we are a created people as a people, that this system is a system that creates problems. How did I run it? Domination, that black people are under domination. Domination is a social problem. right? Therefore, domination generates social problems. If you are dominated, you got a problem. Domination itself is a problem. Domination generates problems. And yet, when we recognize that those who dominate benefit from domination, it means then that they have an investment in the problems generated by domination. And they have an investment in perpetuating those problems and interacting with the people who are dominated in a way as to reinforce those problems. And this is the thing you got to keep in mind. In other words, the very power relationship between African Americans and European Americans, the fact that we are dependent on European Americans, means that problems are created in the African American community by that system of domination, by that power differential. And those problems have been created in the interest of domination. And those problems benefit the Europeans who dominate us. And despite all of the stuff they talk about, they are invested in these problems. When then you talk about the black family, and there are many different types of black families, to tell you the truth, you're talking about a family that has been created by the dynamics of domination. You're talking about a family that is not maladjusted or maladapted, but really, in a way, is adapted to the circumstances under which it must exist. We must even examine this word maladaptive, because it tends to make people think that the person suffering is the cause of their own suffering, you see. But what you will see is the black family structure reorienting itself depending on the political and social changes generated by Europeans. And in what we are calling maladaptive families are often families that, in a sense, have chosen probably the best means under the circumstances, its way of life as an adaptation to the demands placed on it by domination. Let's look at this pseudo value that tells you that you should not have children before you can afford them. Right? You shouldn't have children you can't take care of before you can afford them. Do you know that's a plan for death? That's a death plan. It sounds so nice and pious, doesn't it? Why is it a plan for death? If you got a system that says a man should not create children before he can support that family, and then that same system makes sure that the man is not in a position to support the family, it is literally then telling the people not to what? Have children. It is a genocidal plan hidden behind an apparently moral statement. You see? And you have a lot of this kind of game playing going on. You have to recognize then that the European system creates a problem, then it goes on to define the problem we said the other evening, then it goes on to look at the differences between the people who are affected by the problems and those who are not, and then it says it's the differences that these people show that are the cause of the problem. You see? And then it develops some means to try to deal with these problems. In other words, then, let's quickly look at the fact that the families that we talk about as a traditional family is pretty much a myth and the result of misunderstandings that the media seeks to indoctrinate us with images of families that really never existed and with the kind of family lives that real people cannot live. These images block us from seeing the reality that we are in. It blocks us from developing sound and realistic policies so that we can really change the situation that we are in. These kind of images create in us a state of guilt. You have to realize, you see, this culture is a culture of inequality that we live in. America is characterized principally by the fact that it suffers from gross inequalities within its population. And those who are gaining from this inequality then must float out an ideology that makes their greed appear rational and moral. And when you then look at the inequalities that you see between classes and the inequalities that you see between groups, you want to know why. Why is it that we see so many poor black folk relative to whites, you see, or single-headed families relative to intact families? What kind of ideology will you float out to explain that? You will note that the media does not permit but two of a possible range of explanations for this situation. One is the explanation of individualism, and the other one is a type of familialism. In other words, the reason why we have differences in wealth in this country and differences in success is due to individual deficiencies in people and deficiencies in families. Not domination, not European control, you see, not other things, but if you're poor, there's something what? Lacking in your character. There's something wrong with you. And if you see poverty and race, there must be something inherently connected to our Africanness, not to a political social system. If you didn't succeed, it must be because you come from a deficient family, not an absence of good schools or an absence of other social institutions or other kinds of things going on in the system. You see, the people who talk about the other things are not allowed to be heard on TV and radio. Only when you're talking about these deficiencies. The crime of this, and this is why individualism is floated out, the crime of this is, though, that the poor themselves and the disadvantaged themselves and the dominated themselves believe this ideology. They believe it. When you believe this ideology of individualism, of deficiencies in individual functioning and deficiencies in family functioning, and you hear this all the time, it's the family, it's the family. You can look at the family background and know who's going to succeed in school. That is so much garbage and rubbish. In a school system that is designed by middle classes, run by middle classes, based on middle class values and intentionalities, based on middle class language and so forth, there's no great shakes to recognize that middle-class children succeed better in those schools. But this is no condemnation of the poor family. This is no commendation of the middle-class family. It is a condemnation of the organization of the school. Because if the school could be what? Reorganized, then the influence of family on the success of children would be reduced tremendously. But the American society, because it does not want to reorganize the schools, which would change power relations, you see, and because it wants to blame the victim, takes its explanation back to the deficient family or to the deficient individual. I had a class here last week called Children at Risk. I said, you expect me to come in here now and put all these characteristics of children at risk, right? You know, what characteristics do children at risk have that makes them different from children not at risk? I'm not giving you that. The first thing I'm going to ask you is what? Who put them at risk? These are children. How have they been placed at risk? Why are you not studying the ones who put them at risk and study them first? Why are you not studying the teachers and the psychological counselors and the other people What happens in the classroom is the result of a social interaction between teacher and child, a social interaction between the construction of the school, a social interaction between the curriculum and the child. There are a lot of interactive relationships that are never even examined because we're so busy looking at the child and describing its characteristics. And the very system itself is creating those characteristics in the children. And yet we look at the created characteristics and say, these are the causes of the problem. There is much going on in the American classroom that can make anybody hyperactive. Yeah. And yet we look at the hyperactivity and say, well, that's the hyperactivity is the reason why they can't learn. But where's the hyperactivity coming from? You see, boy, okay. And we don't recognize. But you see, when you're caught up in the ideology of individualism, when you're caught up in the ideology of the deficient family, you are literally blinded to any other possibilities. I tried to tell a group of psychiatrists a few weeks ago, you see, when you are inculcated with this individualism and the family is deficient, your evaluative instruments will be designed along this line. When you think of how you're going to approach your clients, when you think of how you're going to evaluate them, your first thought is to look for the deficiencies in the client. To look for what? The deficiencies in the family. How about an instrument to measure the deficiencies of the society? The context in which these families exist. But psychiatrists, psychologists do not develop these instruments because they have already been imbued with the ideology of individualism. It never occurs to them, you see. And therefore, their whole evaluation procedure is biased. Their treatment procedure will be biased. And if these people are even cured, they will still be sick. Yeah, they may feel better, but they'll still be sick. And they will then continue to maintain the system. And their very so-called cure will validate the system. That's what I said the other evening. I'll give you this. Let's say your rehabilitative methods work 100%. Every hyperactive child that comes into your class is cured. Miracles. Will that solve the problem? Problem won't be solved. You're curing the child what? After the fact. What is occurring what? Before the fact. That machinery is still what? Pumping them out. And even if you got an effective method, you'll be overwhelmed by all the new crews coming in. And out here you holler, more psychologists, more social workers, more. We can't handle all of them. You understand what I'm saying? And again, to a great extent, you see, the emphasis in school is on effective teaching methods in special ed, effective rehabilitative methods and so forth, but not effective methods of changing the generator of the problems themselves, which is ultimately the power relationship between our people and the other people. And if you want to then prevent, in its deepest sense, all of these social problems that we talk about, then ultimately you must not only concentrate on rehabilitative methods, but you must concentrate on changing the power relationship between our peoples and those who seek to rule over us. If not, even your solutions will not be solutions. And even if they worked 100%, their working 100% will serve to justify the system that you live in. Because it will indicate to those who don't think well that there's nothing wrong with the system, but only wrong with the people. Or that we don't have to change the system because we have this magic bullet, we give this magic injection, and voila, the person is better, and the system continues. And it goes on, and a whole lot of social workers, psychologists, and others have jobs. And the whole industry continues to exist. 5 minutes. So the media blinds us to other possibilities. It makes us feel guilty. And the thing I wanted to say about this is when those of us who are oppressed accept the ideology of individualism and accept this issue, that it is the family that is the cause of the problem. A lot of us saying that too. We've fallen into this broken black family trap and this black family issue. But the final causal thing is not the family. The family itself reflects other problems in the system, you see. But if you accept the family as the ultimate explanation of what is happening to us and our children, or you accept individual deficiencies as the ultimate explanation, when your family does not succeed, or when members fail, or when you yourself do not succeed, you're going to be then motivated toward what? Self-blame, self-negation, self-alienation, self-hatred, loss of self-confidence. And when you see a lot of people your same color, you're going to start hating your race because you think it's intrinsic to the whole group. And it's that ideology that got you. And now you see that ideology itself begins to create an attitude toward the self, toward others, and that attitude itself creates further attitudes, you see. And now the psychologist comes in and says, we have a bunch of people here who exhibit attitudes of self-hatred, self-alienation, lack of self-confidence, low aspirations. And it must be then the low aspirations that are the causes, that's the cause of their problems. We have a family here, and we know if you look at the black family, if you look at it in terms of income, those families earning above $50,000 a year, 96% of them are intact. Husband, wife, children. Above 25, 30,000, 85% are intact. What are we saying here then? That there's a relation between income and intactness, if you value that. And that as you drop, the lower you drop in income, the more you're going to have people not being married in intact families. But what are we going to make that? And when you see families breaking up, often they're breaking up because of economic problems in many instances. But then what are we going to say? And these problems themselves create feelings of guilt and anger and the other kind of thing. And then you go in and you see these people filled with anger, see these people who've been trying to get employed now giving up, and we're going to say it's their apathy, it's their anger, it's this and that is the cause of the problem. You understand? And we have to be very aware of this kind of thing. And this belief in individualism then makes us feel guilty. And guilt, of course, will often create overcompensation. People who are trying to now deny reality and get engaged in narcotics and other kinds of things to deal with it. It would produce anger. We feel we've been betrayed by our family. So it means that often the images projected by the media are dysfunctional, create dysfunction themselves. And we have to watch this kind of thing. You got a lot of nonsense. How many of you watched Little Family on On the Prairie? What was it called? What was it called? What was that show called? Little House on the Prairie. There are some people you couldn't tear away from Little House on the Prairie because it was so sweet, wasn't it? And the little Waltons. A potent mythology. Just a potent mythology. It is individuals who settle the West. Can you believe that kind of nonsense? People with individual drive that settle the West. Crazy. Individual families who built their little log cabins out there, had fought off the Indians and supported each other. You're out of your minds. Out of your minds to believe that kind of nonsense. First of all, the West was inhabited by nations of people already and families there. And what did you need? A whole army that went out there and destroyed the Indian nations and destroyed family life. And these are the same jokers and the descendants of these jokers that try to tell you about family. When they destroyed whole nations of family, when they destroyed the African family, bringing us into enslavement, and they dared to even lecture us about family. The U.S. government, including the Buffalo Soldiers out there clearing the West for these families. Let's deal with it. Building railroads for these families. Giving away land to the railroad companies. 20 miles on each side of the railroad the U.S. government gave to the railroad companies. You got to learn the history here, ladies and gentlemen. I keep telling us we've got to understand what's going on. Quick thing here. Why are the Koreans and Korea ahead its nation and people? Is it because of their family values? You got a lot of that nonsense too, you know. Oh, they have strong family values. They stick together. We hear that a good deal too. They're willing to work long hours. And the Japanese are industrious. They have Confucian values. They're a homogeneous family. Ask yourself this question. They've had those values for 10,000 years. Why hadn't they entered the technological age before, 40 years ago? Why weren't they ahead of the Europeans in entering the technological age and so forth? If those are the main values and the reasons why they have technological advances today, why have they only advanced in the last 20, 30, 40 years? You know why? Because of the relationship of the United States government with these countries. You sit around here and you support these Koreans. The Koreans should be bringing you gifts. That's right. As many as our black men died on the soil of Korea to protect these Koreans, and these Koreans could have enjoyed the privileges of America that these black men could not enjoy at the time they fought the war. That's right, I saw them go off to war, and I saw them come back in boxes. And I was right there when they had the black fountains and the white fountains and the segregated counters and all the other stuff. The same thing the North Koreans or the Chinese could have enjoyed even at that moment. This nation invested the lives of black people in that nation. And they invested in the war in that nation. They took black folks' tax money, shipped it over there, and invested millions and millions of dollars in that land, even in war, and gave the Japanese contracts for making the army trucks that were used in the war. Don't come telling me about any industriousness of Japanese people. You understand? But they want to run this game on you. And then after the black tax money and black tax lives were given to protect the Koreans and are still there today to protect the South Koreans, for what reason? To make South Korea safe for private investment, so that private white businessmen could have a safe territory to invest their money and wealth in. And then the United States government, with black people's tax money, made sure that the South Korean government was stabilized, even to the point of maintaining a dictatorship, to make certain that white businessmen would not fear investing and in that country for fear that the government would change and they would lose their investment. And there are black men and women standing there to make sure that that government is stabilized so that white men can safely invest in this nation. And then black money, tax money goes in and builds the infrastructures, the highways and the railroads and the other things of South Korea. Do you understand what I'm saying? And you want to fall for the baloney that these people are here because they work long hours? They come back with your tax money and the lives of your men and stand in your face and insult you? And then you're going to fall for a stupid ideology that talks about that they are here because they have some individual and family drives. You've got to be out of your mind to believe it. And the same thing goes on with the Japanese, rebuilt by U.S. money, built on the lives of black men. Europe, Marshall Plan, rebuilt with U.S. money and tax money, built on the lives of black men, built on the fact that money was shipped over there by the tons, and then they come back over here and tell you that if you ask the government for one nickel, something is wrong with you. That you shouldn't demand any special relationship with the U.S. government. You shouldn't demand that the U.S. government lend special favors to you. Do you know why the U.S. Navy is in the oceans? Do you think it's to protect America? The U.S. Navy is in the oceans to protect private enterprise, to make sure that the white investment money and the merchandise that's involved in that money is safeguarded. In other words, the U.S. Navy rides shotgun for private investment. If we were so doggone caught up about the government not doing any special favors, then we should tell these rich folk, you protect your own cargo as it moves across the oceans. And yet if that United States Navy, again stocked by black men and women, and the armies were not out there, you'd have a new old crime recreated. That crime being what? Piracy. None of these nations would be seeing those ships laden with all that wealth floating by unguarded. But then they come back again and tell you that you shouldn't demand any special control of your community or of your life, or you shouldn't expect any special contribution to the growth and development of your economic wealth in America. And we got a bunch of black jokers who want to argue that in our faces, even though they can't see it right in front of them. The Chinese and the Koreans and Taiwan are ahead because of the special relationship that the United States government has with them. You understand what I'm saying? The U.S. government protecting them, investing in them, building them. Am I clear here? But you see, they're going to run the rod on us. That is the result of what? Their values, their family-centeredness. No. You get that kind of money, wealth, and protection, you'll have different values. Let me tell you one other thing, and that thing is this. You see, and that's why you got to have power in America. And that's why you got to understand the games that are being played, you see. Japan's highest industrial prize is named after an American, the Deming Award. When you that's like receiving the Nobel Prize in industry. And it is awarded to the company or the corporation that has shown the greatest improvement in its organization and productivity and so forth. Why would Japan's highest award be named for an American? You know why? Because it was the American who went over there and trained its management forces and its workforces. That's why. In other words, you have to teach people how to work. You have to teach people to be organized in a particular sort of way to achieve a particular end, ladies and gentlemen. The Japanese just didn't come spontaneously to be what they were. They were taught to be what they are. The same with the Koreans. The lines were organized, the machinery produced. From where? By whom? By what process? Now recognize this then. If African Americans had the kind of power that we could have in America, we would be saying the same thing about Africa that is being said about the Asians today. Because we would have the power to have influenced U.S. foreign policy, spending, and relationships to African countries in a way then that would have advanced Africa's economic advancement and technological advancement, and we'd be talking about how industrious the Africans are today, how well organized they are, ladies and gentlemen. Because people are what they are conditioned to be. But because the African Americans have not developed the appropriate power in America, we have not been able even to use our own tax money and our own wealth and our own expertise and our own influence on America to veer American policy toward Africa in such a way that would create the kind of change we want in Africa. Why? Because we believe in individualism. We believe in familyism, the idea that all of this growth and development we see come from families and individuals. The 1950s family received the most government subsidization of any family in the American history. The pioneer American family received tremendous government subsidies. These families were underwritten tremendously by America, by the American government. Who do you think built the roads? The families? Who do you think built the railroads? The families? Who do you think built the telegraph systems? The families. Built the dams? The families. Cleared the Indians, ran the Mexicans out and took half of their land? The families? No. The government itself. Who electrified the farms? The families? On and on we can go. By the way, Little House on the Prairie was a propaganda piece even in its original sense. The lady who edited it, she came home, she got pissed because she got tired of paying taxes to the American government. She went home to Mama, give you her name so you can follow it up, Rose Wilder Lane. Her mother was doing the writing. She herself, the daughter, was a freelance writer, and she had a bone to pick with the U.S. government and was greatly anti-welfare. So she edited her mother's writings so that the family would be, so that the image would be presented of a family that was totally self-sufficient and totally providing for itself. And this image then, and this myth, was projected on the American media, and it's created tremendous problems. And yet, as I said earlier, these families and this type of family was greatly subsidized. And the American West is still, of all of the regions of the world today, of the nation today, subsidized by the American government. Do you know that the American government is selling acres out there to large corporations for as little as what? I think $8 an acre, from which these people mine tremendous amounts of minerals and other kind of things? You have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, do you hear these politicians talking about entitlements? You notice they never defined them. And most people didn't read automatically that they're talking about welfare. Why is it that they have problem with entitlement? You know why? Because the bulk of the entitlements go to wealthy people. The entitlements essentially support the middle and upper classes. For every $5,000 that families who earn $10,000 and less gets from the government, I'm talking about, families earning $100,000 a year get 10. That is why they have difficulty reducing the deficit. They will have to confront the ruling in the upper classes of itself. So what am I saying here then, ladies and gentlemen? We must define family for ourselves. We must determine what family values work for us. And we must determine those values in the context of what is best for us. And we must determine them in the sense that they must liberate us as a people. And we must recognize above all that we as a people are family. Thank you kindly for your attention.